What does it take to pull off the perfect crime in one of America's busiest airports, with millions of dollars at stake and dozens of security cameras watching your every move? On a humid Miami night in August 2012, a group of unknown individuals provided their own chilling answer to this question, orchestrating what would become one of the most audacious and mysterious heists in American aviation history. The time was 11:47 p.m. when the security alarm at Miami International Airport's high-value cargo terminal first triggered an alert. By the time armed guards arrived 4 minutes later, they found only ghostly emptiness, where $28.6 million in unmarked bills, diamonds and bearer bonds had been secured just moments before. No signs of forced entry, no apparent breach of the sophisticated security systems. Just an empty vault and the distant echo of jet engines that would forever mask the sound of the perpetrator's escape. 13 years later, despite countless man-hours of investigation, hundreds of interviews, and the involvement of multiple federal agencies, not a single arrest has been made, not $1 recovered, not one diamond returned. The case remains as enigmatic today as it was on that sultry August night. This is the story of the Miami Airport Heist, a criminal masterpiece that continues to baffle authorities and fascinate the public, a puzzle missing too many pieces to solve, and a daring assault on what should have been an impenetrable fortress of security. To understand the magnitude of this crime, one must first understand Miami International Airport itself. Sprawling across 3,230 acres with 4 runways and handling over 45 million passengers annually, MIA serves as America's gateway to Latin America. More importantly, it processes billions of dollars in high-value cargo each year, making it both an economic powerhouse and a potential target. The cargo terminal security protocols were considered state-of-the-art: biometric access controls, motion sensors, 24-hour armed guards, and a vault certified to withstand cutting torches for up to 6 hours. Yet somehow, the perpetrators rendered these measures useless in what investigators would later describe as a surgical strike executed with military precision. The story begins 3 days before the heist, when cargo flight 7732 arrived from Zurich, Switzerland. Among its contents was a nondescript container designated for transfer to Caracas, Venezuela, after a 72-hour layover in Miami. The official manifest listed the contents as financial instruments and banking materials, a common euphemism for high-value transfers. What wasn't common was the level of security accompanying this particular shipment. Representatives from both the sending and receiving financial institutions were present for the unloading, along with private security contractors carrying diplomatic credentials. That shipment was special from the moment it touched down, recalled Frank Mendez, a former cargo handler who was working that night. The suits were everywhere, watching everything. They even brought their own transport vehicle onto the tarmac, which almost never happens. Something about it just felt different. The container was transferred to the airport's high-security vault area, a facility that few airport employees ever see and even fewer have access to. Located 3 levels below the main terminal, the vault complex resembles a bank more than an airport facility, with multiple security checkpoints, man-traps, and surveillance systems designed to make unauthorized access virtually impossible. Carlos Vega, who served as MIA's security director from 2009 to 2015, described the facility. "We're talking about a concrete bunker with steel-reinforced walls, accessible only through a series of progressively more secure checkpoints. The vault itself required 3 separate keys, held by 3 separate individuals, plus a timed combination lock. The entire area was under continuous video surveillance, with feeds monitored both on-site and at a remote location. In theory, you couldn't even approach the outer door without setting off multiple alerts. Theory, however, would soon collide with a reality that no one had anticipated. August 17, 2012, began as a routine Friday at Miami International. The afternoon thunderstorms had cleared by early evening, leaving behind the thick, heavy air typical of South Florida summers. The cargo areas operated on their standard 24-hour schedule, processing everything from fresh flowers to medical supplies, with particular attention paid to the high-value items that would remain in the vault over the weekend. The overnight shift was typically quieter, with fewer flights and less personnel. This particular night, the vault area was staffed by 2 security officers and 1 supervisor, with additional personnel monitoring the surveillance systems from the main security office. All standard procedure for a facility that had never experienced a serious security breach. At exactly 11:43 p.m., according to the security logs, something unprecedented occurred. Every surveillance camera in the vault area simultaneously went dark. Not just one feed, but all 17 cameras covering every angle of the approach corridors, the antechamber, and the vault itself. 4 minutes later, the backup power system failed as well, plunging the entire sublevel into darkness save for the dim emergency lighting. Security protocols for such situations were clear: immediate lockdown and deployment of armed response teams. Those teams arrived at the vault area within minutes, finding all doors secured and no obvious signs of intrusion. When power was restored at 11:52 p.m., a physical inspection of the vault was ordered. What they found, or rather what they didn't find, would spark the largest airport theft investigation in American history. I opened that vault and just stood there, trying to process what I was seeing, said Raymond Torres, the security supervisor on duty that night. The container was there, but it had been opened. The specialized shipping crates inside were all there too, but they were empty. Whatever had been inside, and we weren't even cleared to know exactly what that was gone. Just gone. Gone were the cash, diamonds and bearer bonds being transferred between financial institutions. Gone was any obvious explanation of how the theft had occurred. And gone, it seemed, were the perpetrators themselves, having vanished as completely as their spoils. The initial investigation focused on the obvious. It had to be an inside job. The complexity of the security systems, the precise timing of the power failures, and the apparent knowledge of exactly which container to target all pointed to insider involvement. Yet the clearance levels required to access the information needed to plan such a heist were extremely limited. We're talking about maybe 15 people worldwide who had complete knowledge of what was in that shipment, when it would arrive, and where exactly it would be stored, explained Special Agent Diana Ramirez, who led the FBI's investigation. And all 15 had ironclad alibis. Furthermore, the technical aspects of the crime bordered on the impossible. The surveillance system operated on a closed circuit with no external access points. The power failure affected only specific systems in the vault area, not the entire facility, suggesting a targeted approach rather than a general outage. And most puzzling of all, the vault itself showed no signs of forced entry. The locks had been opened using the correct combinations and keys. It was as if ghosts had walked through walls, known exactly where to go and what to take, and then vanished, Ramirez said. In 22 years with the Bureau, I'd never seen anything like it. As the investigation deepened, so did the mysteries. The private security contractors who had accompanied the shipment disappeared within hours of the theft, their diplomatic credentials later proven to be elaborate forgeries. The financial institutions involved initially cooperated with authorities, but became increasingly reticent as questions arose about insurance coverage and potential liability. Then came perhaps the most bizarre twist. 48 hours after the heist, surveillance footage from a different part of the airport revealed something that had been overlooked in the initial chaos. At 11:35 p.m. on the night of the theft, 8 minutes before the vault cameras failed, 3 maintenance workers had entered a utility room near the cargo area. Nothing unusual about that, except that when cross-referenced with employment records, no maintenance was scheduled for that area, and the 3 individuals captured on camera matched no known airport employees. "We had our first glimpse of them," Ramirez recalled. 3 men in standard airport maintenance uniforms, carrying tool bags, walking with purpose but not hurry. Nothing about them would catch your eye, and that was clearly by design. Days, the footage showed the 3 entering the utility room, but never leaving. When investigators examined the room, they discovered it contained access to the main electrical conduits for the sub-level where the vault was located. More importantly, it also housed an old drainage system dating back to the airport's original construction in the 1940s, a system that, while no longer in use, connected to a network of maintenance tunnels running beneath the entire airport complex. "They found a blind spot in an otherwise comprehensive security apparatus," explained Vega. "Those drainage tunnels weren't on any current blueprint. They were supposed to have been sealed off decades ago, but budget cuts and administrative oversights meant that some of the access points remained functional. It was a vulnerability that nobody had identified because nobody even knew it existed. No, the theory that emerged was both elegant and disturbing. The perpetrators had used the old drainage system to bypass the main security checkpoints, accessing the sub-level through utility corridors that hadn't been properly secured because they weren't supposed to exist. From there, they had somehow compromised the electrical systems to disable the surveillance cameras and emergency lighting, giving themselves the darkness and invisibility they needed to approach the vault undetected. But that still didn't explain how they had opened the vault itself, with its 3 separate keys and timed combination lock. No technology available to civilians could have breached those defenses in the time frame involved. The inescapable conclusion was that they had help, someone with access, someone with knowledge, someone on the inside. The list of potential suspects was both extensive and frustratingly inconclusive. Over 330 airport employees had some level of access to the cargo areas, though only a handful had clearance for the vault itself. Each was investigated exhaustively, their backgrounds examined, their finances scrutinized, their movements on the night in question reconstructed minute by minute. "We interviewed everyone from janitors to executives," said Ramirez. "We pulled phone records, bank statements, travel histories. We had people account for every hour of their day for weeks before and after the heist, and we came up with precisely nothing. No unexplained wealth, no suspicious connections, no behavior that couldn't be accounted for." The investigation expanded to include employees of the financial institutions involved, the security contractors who had accompanied the shipment, and even diplomatic personnel from countries with connections to either the origin or destination of the stolen goods. International agencies were brought in: Interpol, Europol, the Swiss Federal Police. The case file grew to encompass thousands of pages of interviews, analyses, and theories. And still, the fundamental questions remained unanswered. Who had planned this impossible heist? How had they opened a vault that couldn't be opened without authorized personnel? And perhaps most vexingly, where had they gone with $28? $6 million in cash and valuables that should have been impossible to move without detection. 6 months into the investigation, the first significant break came from an unexpected source. A routine customs inspection at a small airfield in Belize uncovered documentation linking a private charter flight that had departed Miami in the early morning hours of August 18th, less than 6 hours after the heist, to a shell company later connected to Eastern European organized crime. It wasn't much, just a paper trail that established a possible exit route, Ramirez explained, but it was something concrete in a case that had been frustratingly abstract. The chartered plane had filed a flight plan for Mexico City, but had diverted to Belize City before continuing to a private airstrip in the Guatemalan countryside. From there, the trail went cold again. No passenger manifests were available, and the charter company itself was found to be operating through a complex network of offshore entities that effectively obscured its true ownership. Meanwhile, financial investigators were tracking the potential movement of the stolen goods, particularly the bearer bonds, which would be difficult to liquidate without attracting attention. Bearer bonds are financial instruments where possession equals ownership, with no registration or records of who owns them. They were once a favorite tool of money launderers and tax evaders, but have become increasingly regulated in recent decades. Moving and cashing $12 million in bearer bonds would require sophisticated financial networks and connections to institutions willing to look the other way. The bonds were actually more valuable than the cash in some ways, explained Martin Kelsey, a former Treasury Department investigator who consulted on the case. Cash has bulk and weight. $16 million in mixed bills would fill several large duffel bags and weigh over 350 pounds. But those bonds could be worth just as much while fitting into a manila envelope. The problem for the thieves would be finding someone to honor them without asking too many questions. Authorities placed alerts with financial institutions worldwide, but the bonds never surfaced, at least not in any way that could be traced back to the heist. It was as if they had simply evaporated, along with the cash and diamonds that had accompanied them. The investigation continued, but the momentum began to slow as leads dried up and resources were inevitably diverted to newer cases. By the one-year anniversary of the heist, the active investigation had been scaled back, though the case remained open. By the 5-year mark, it had largely faded from public consciousness, joining the ranks of unsolved mysteries that occasionally resurface in documentaries and true crime podcasts. But for those closest to the investigation, the Miami airport heist remained a persistent enigma, a case defined more by its unanswered questions than by any concrete conclusions. "It bothers me to this day," admitted Ramirez, who has since retired from the FBI but continues to follow developments in the case. "Not just professionally but personally. Somewhere out there are the people who planned this, who executed it with such precision, who somehow managed to disappear along with millions of dollars, and we don't have the first idea who they are." For Carlos Vega, the former security director who found his systems defeated so completely, the case represents both a professional failure and a troubling reminder of human ingenuity directed toward criminal ends. "We had built what we believed was an impenetrable system," he said. "Multiple layers of security, redundancies upon redundancies, every contingency accounted for. Or so we thought. What this case taught me is that no system, no matter how sophisticated, is truly impregnable. Given enough time, resources, and determination, someone will find the weakness you overlooked." That lesson led to comprehensive security overhauls at airports across the country. The old drainage systems at Miami International were finally properly sealed. New protocols were implemented for high-value cargo, including GPS tracking devices and randomized storage locations. Surveillance systems were upgraded to include backup power sources independent of the main electrical grid. Yet the question remains, would even these enhanced measures be enough to stop a team with the skill and audacity demonstrated by the Miami airport heist perpetrators? As the years passed, theories about the crime multiplied. Some speculated that it was the work of a specialized crew with military or intelligence backgrounds, perhaps former special forces operators who had transitioned to mercenary work. Others believed it was an operation by a sophisticated transnational criminal organization, possibly from Eastern Europe or the former Soviet republics, where expertise in defeating high-security systems had been honed during the chaotic post-Cold War years. Still others proposed more exotic explanations, that the heist was actually a covert intelligence operation disguised as a theft, or that the stolen goods had never actually existed. the whole thing being an elaborate insurance fraud orchestrated by the financial institutions themselves. "The truth is, we just don't know," said Ramirez. "And after all this time, I'm not sure we ever will. Some cases just don't get solved, no matter how many resources you throw at them, no matter how dedicated the investigators. Sometimes the bad guys win." Yet the story of the Miami airport heist continued to evolve, even as the original crime receded into history. In 2017, 5 years after the theft, a curious development occurred in São Paulo, Brazil. A boutique jewelry store owner was arrested for tax evasion, and during the subsequent investigation, authorities discovered several diamonds with characteristics matching those stolen in Miami. The Brazilian police alerted their American counterparts, but by the time the connection was established, the jeweler had been released on bail and had disappeared. The diamonds were secured as evidence, but conclusive identification proved impossible. The stones had been recut, reducing their size and altering their distinctive features. "It was tantalizing but ultimately inconclusive," Ramirez said of the Brazilian connection. "Could those diamonds have been part of our stolen shipment? Possibly. Could we prove it beyond reasonable doubt? Unfortunately not." Then, in 2019, came an even stranger twist. A memoir published by a retired Ukrainian intelligence officer included a passing reference to a magnificent operation conducted at a major American transportation hub that had been executed flawlessly by individuals with specialized training in defeating Western security systems. The memoir contained no specific details about the Miami heist, and the author denied any direct knowledge when contacted by American authorities. Yet the timing and description aligned too perfectly to be mere coincidence. It raised the possibility that the heist was even more complex than we had imagined, explained Kelsey. Perhaps it wasn't just a criminal enterprise, but something with state sponsorship, or at least state-trained personnel. That would explain the level of sophistication we encountered. Such theories remain speculative, but they underscore the extraordinary nature of the crime and the continued fascination it holds for both law enforcement professionals and the public. A heist of this magnitude, executed with such precision and followed by such a complete disappearance, belongs more to the realm of Hollywood fiction than to reality. Yet it happened, leaving behind a case file filled with questions that may never be answered. For Miami International Airport, the heist became both a cautionary tale and an impetus for change. The security failures exposed by the theft led to a fundamental re-evaluation of how high-value cargo is handled, not just in Miami, but at airports worldwide. New international standards were developed for vault construction, surveillance, personnel vetting, and emergency response protocols. In a strange way, the thieves did us a favor, reflected Vega. They showed us vulnerabilities we didn't know existed. They forced us to question assumptions we didn't realize we were making. The systems protecting high-value cargo today are immeasurably better because of what happened in 2012. Small comfort, perhaps, for the institutions that lost millions, or for the investigators who devoted years of their lives to a case that remains frustratingly unsolved. But in the world of security, lessons learned from failures often prove more valuable than successes that merely reinforce existing practices. As for the money, the diamonds, and the bearer bonds, they remain missing, their whereabouts as mysterious as the identities of those who took them. Somewhere, perhaps, the architects of the Miami airport heist are living comfortable lives, enjoying the fruits of their audacious crime. Or perhaps they met darker fates, betrayed by accomplices or eliminated by the shadowy organizations that may have employed them. That's the thing about a case like this, mused Ramirez. The ending isn't just unknown, it's unknowable. We can speculate endlessly, but the truth remains out of reach, locked away as securely as those valuables were supposed to have been. For now, the Miami airport heist retains its status as one of the most perfect crimes in modern history, a theft that should have been impossible, executed by ghosts who left no trace, taking with them not just millions in valuables, but also the certainty that even the most sophisticated security systems are ultimately designed, built, and operated by fallible human beings. And perhaps that is the most valuable lesson of all, both for those who protect such systems and for those who might seek to defeat them. In the eternal chess match between security and its challengers, the most dangerous move is believing you've anticipated everything, because somewhere someone is already thinking of the approach you never considered, the vulnerability you never identified, the perfect heist you never imagined could happen. Until, of course, it does. The night of August 17th, 2012, forever changed how we think about security in our most protected spaces. But the story didn't end there. In fact, some would say it was just beginning. In the years following the heist, a shadow economy of information emerged around the case. Retired security personnel, former airport employees, and even some of the investigators began sharing theories and rumors in private forums and closed-door meetings. None had definitive answers, but collectively, they built a more nuanced understanding of what might have happened that night. One of the most persistent theories centered on a man known only as Volk, Russian for wolf, a legendary figure in Eastern European criminal circles who specialized in defeating high-security systems. According to intelligence reports, Volk had been active since the late 1990s, orchestrating high-value thefts throughout Europe and Asia, but had never been identified or captured. There were certain hallmarks in the Miami job that match Volk's methodology, explained Anton Korchev, a former Interpol analyst who had tracked the shadowy figure for years. The precision timing, the exploitation of overlooked access points, the complete absence of violence or confrontation. Volk's philosophy has always been that truly elegant theft should be discovered only after the perpetrators are long gone. Another theory, one that gained traction among cybersecurity experts, suggested that the heist represented a new hybrid of physical and digital intrusion. The simultaneous failure of all 17 surveillance cameras couldn't have been accomplished through purely physical means, they argued. There must have been a cyber attack component, perhaps targeting the security system's software or firmware. What if they never actually entered the vault area until after the cameras were disabled? Proposed Eliza Chen, a cybersecurity consultant who has studied the case extensively. What if they found a way to access the surveillance system remotely, insert a loop of empty corridors, and then simply walked in while the guards were seeing what the thieves wanted them to see? Such a scenario would explain one of the most perplexing aspects of the case, how the perpetrators had managed to approach the vault without being detected by the multiple layers of security preceding it. It wouldn't, however, explain how they had opened the vault itself, with its analog locks requiring physical keys held by 3 separate individuals. Unless, of course, they had help. The insider theory never fully dissipated, despite the exhaustive investigation of all personnel with access. Some speculated that the FBI had identified suspects but lacked sufficient evidence to bring charges. Others suggested that the accomplice might not have been someone with direct access to the vault, but rather someone with knowledge of its security systems and potential vulnerabilities. You wouldn't necessarily need the actual key holders to be involved, explained Raymond Torres, the security supervisor who had discovered the theft. You might just need someone who knew exactly how the systems worked, where the blind spots were, what the response protocols would be in case of a power failure. That kind of operational knowledge would be invaluable to people planning something like this. Torres himself had been a suspect early in the investigation, given his position and access. He was ultimately cleared, but the experience left him with a unique perspective on the case and a determination to understand what had really happened. I spent 3 years after I left MIA just researching vault security, talking to experts, trying to figure out how they did it, he said. The best theory I could come up with involves a technique called lock manipulation, essentially opening a lock by feel rather than with a key. It's something that takes enormous skill and practice, but it's not impossible for someone with the right training and enough time. The time factor, however, remained problematic. According to the security logs, the perpetrators had at most 9 minutes between the camera failure and the arrival of the response team. Nowhere near enough time to manipulate 3 separate high-security locks, even for the most skilled practitioner. Unless, of course, they had already been inside. This led to perhaps the most audacious theory of all, that the thieves had concealed themselves inside the cargo area hours or even days before the heist, perhaps hiding within shipments or in maintenance areas, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Such a scenario would have required intimate knowledge of cargo procedures, security patrol patterns, and the physical layout of the facility, again pointing to inside information, if not direct insider participation. "It sounds far-fetched until you consider the alternatives," said Frank Mendez, the former cargo handler. "Either they walked through walls, or they were already in there, and I know which one I find more plausible." The investigation explored this possibility, reviewing all cargo processed through the facility in the days leading up to the heist. Nothing suspicious was identified, but the sheer volume of material moving through Miami International, hundreds of tons daily, made a comprehensive check nearly impossible. If the perpetrators had concealed themselves within legitimate cargo, they had chosen their hiding place well. As theories multiplied, so did reported sightings of the stolen items. In 2016, a diamond dealer in Antwerp was found in possession of stones that potentially matched those taken in the heist. In 2018, unusually large cash transactions at several Caribbean banks triggered alerts linked to the stolen currency's serial numbers. In 2020, financial analysts identified a pattern of bearer bond redemptions in Singapore that bore striking similarities to the financial instruments taken from Miami. None of these leads produced definitive connections to the heist, but collectively they painted a picture of the stolen goods being slowly, carefully dispersed through international markets, laundered, in essence, through a global financial system with too many gaps and blind spots to effectively track such transactions. If you're patient enough, if you move small amounts through multiple channels over several years, it becomes nearly impossible to maintain the trail, explained Kelsey. That's especially true with bearer bonds and diamonds, which can change hands multiple times without formal documentation. For the investigators who had pursued the case most intensely, this gradual dissipation of evidence was perhaps the most frustrating aspect of all. It suggested that the perpetrators were not only skilled enough to execute the heist, but disciplined enough to resist the temptation of quick profits that might have made them vulnerable to detection. "Professional criminals, true professionals, understand that patience is essential," said Ramirez. "The ones who get caught are usually the ones who try to enjoy their spoils too quickly, too visibly. Whoever did this, they played the long game. They waited. They were careful, and that makes them almost impossible to catch after the fact." By 2022, a decade after the heist, the case had been officially designated cold by the FBI, though it remained technically open. The statute of limitations for most federal theft charges is 5 years, but because the crime involved international financial instruments and potentially crossed multiple jurisdictions, certain aspects remained prosecutable. Nevertheless, the practical reality was that without new evidence or a confession, the Miami airport heist would likely remain unsolved. For Carlos Vega, who had staked his professional reputation on the security systems that failed so spectacularly that night, the lack of resolution was particularly difficult to accept. "I still wake up sometimes thinking about it," he admitted. "Still run through the scenarios in my mind, trying to figure out what we missed, what we could have done differently. It's the not knowing that gets to you in the end. Not just who did it, but how. What vulnerability did they see that we didn't?" That question, what did they see that we didn't, lies at the heart of the Miami airport heist mystery. In a facility designed to be impenetrable, with systems engineered to detect and prevent exactly this type of crime, how did the perpetrators identify the one approach that would succeed? Was it brilliant insight, exhaustive research, inside information, or some combination of all three? Perhaps the most disturbing possibility is that the vulnerability had been there all along, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with the right perspective to recognize and exploit it. If so, what other supposedly secure systems might contain similar weaknesses, visible only to those with the specific knowledge or mindset to perceive them? This question has implications far beyond the specifics of the Miami case. In an increasingly interconnected world, where financial systems, critical infrastructure, and sensitive information are protected by complex security architectures, the possibility of unforeseen vulnerabilities represents a profound challenge. The Miami airport heist demonstrated that even the most sophisticated defenses can be defeated by adversaries with sufficient skill, resources, and determination. For security professionals, the case became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of complacency and the importance of constantly re-evaluating protective measures from the perspective of potential attackers. The concept of red team exercises, in which security experts deliberately attempt to breach their own systems to identify weaknesses, gained prominence in part due to lessons learned from the Miami heist. "The people who designed that vault system were thinking like defenders," explained Chen. "They were asking, how do we keep people out? But they should have been thinking like attackers, asking, if I had to get in, how would I do it?" That shift in perspective can reveal vulnerabilities that aren't apparent when you're focused solely on building walls. This insight led to fundamental changes in how high-security facilities are designed and operated. Modern systems now incorporate not just physical and electronic barriers, but also behavioral analytics, artificial intelligence monitoring, and randomized procedures specifically designed to counter the type of methodical planning that made the Miami heist possible. Yet even with these advancements, the question remains, are we any better protected today than we were in 2012? Or have potential adversaries simply adapted their methods to overcome new defenses, maintaining the eternal cat-and-mouse game between security professionals and those who seek to defeat them? The Miami airport heist offers no definitive answers, but it continues to inform discussions about security, vulnerability, and the limits of protection in a world where the stakes, financial, informational, and geopolitical, keep rising. It stands as both a fascinating unsolved mystery and a profound lesson in the complexity of securing valuable assets in the modern era. For those directly affected by the heist, the passage of time has brought a degree of perspective, if not closure. The financial institutions involved eventually reached settlements with their insurers, though the details remain confidential. The airport implemented comprehensive security upgrades at considerable expense, but with the benefit of lessons learned from the breach. The investigators moved on to other cases, carrying with them the knowledge and experience gained from this one. But the questions linger, and with them a certain grudging admiration for the sheer audacity and execution of the crime. In a world where true anonymity seems increasingly unattainable, where digital footprints and surveillance cameras record our every movement, the perpetrators of the Miami airport heist achieved something remarkable. They committed a major crime in one of the most secure and monitored environments imaginable, then vanished completely, taking their secrets with them. You can't help but be impressed on some level, admitted Ramirez. Not with the criminality of it, but with the planning, the precision, the flawless execution. These weren't ordinary thieves. Whoever they were extraordinary in their field, which just happens to be a field that puts them on the wrong side of the law. That ambivalence, condemning the crime while acknowledging the skill behind it, permeates discussions of the Miami airport heist, lending it the aura of a modern legend, a real-life heist movie where the audience is left both satisfied and unsettled by the protagonist's escape. It's a narrative that continues to fascinate precisely because it defies our expectations about justice and resolution, leaving us to contemplate not just who did it, but whether anyone could do it again. As Miami International Airport approaches its centennial anniversary, the 2012 heist remains a singular event in its history, a momentary but profound breach in systems designed to be impenetrable, a reminder that absolute security is an aspiration rather than an achievable state. The money is gone, the perpetrators free, the case officially cold, but unofficially still consuming the thoughts of those who brushed against its mystery. And somewhere, perhaps, the architects of the perfect crime are still out there, their identities as securely protected as the vault they managed to breach, their methods still unknown, their legacy a puzzling gap in the annals of criminal justice, a case defined not by what we know, but by what we don't. The Miami airport heist reminds us that in a world of ever-advancing technology and increasingly sophisticated security, the human element remains both the strongest defense and the most vulnerable point of failure. It is human ingenuity that builds impenetrable vaults, and human ingenuity that finds ways to breach them. It is human vigilance that maintains security, and human error or complicity that compromises it. In the end, perhaps that is the true lesson of this extraordinary crime, that in the contest between security and those who would defeat it, the decisive factor is not technology, but people, their skills, their insights, their motivations, and their choices. The perfect heist, like the perfect defense, is ultimately a human achievement, for better or worse. And as long as that remains true, there will always be vulnerabilities waiting to be discovered, security systems waiting to be tested, and audacious individuals willing to attempt what others believe to be impossible, just as they did on that humid Miami night in August 2012 when they pulled off the perfect crime and vanished into history. The investigation into the Miami airport heist took yet another unexpected turn in early 2023 when a series of encrypted messages appeared on the dark web, purportedly from someone claiming intimate knowledge of the crime. The messages, posted through anonymized channels that made tracing impossible, included details about the heist that had never been made public, specifics about the vault's interior layout, the exact composition of the stolen goods, and the sequence of the security system failures. FBI cybercrime specialists analyzed the messages but could not determine their authenticity or origin. Were they truly from one of the perpetrators, perhaps seeking notoriety after a decade of silence? Or were they from someone with access to the investigation files, playing an elaborate hoax? The details were accurate enough to be concerning, said a current FBI official who requested anonymity due to the ongoing nature of the investigation. But there was nothing that couldn't have been known by someone with access to the case files or connections to airport personnel. Without some form of verification, a piece of physical evidence from the heist, for instance, we couldn't treat the messages as a credible confession. The anonymous poster made no demands and sought no publicity beyond the encrypted forums where the messages appeared. After a flurry of posts over a 2-week period, the account went silent, leaving behind tantalizing hints but no conclusive revelations. One detail in particular caught the attention of investigators, a reference to the woman in the painting, which aligned with a previously unexplored theory that the heist might have been connected to an art theft in Europe the previous year. In that case, a valuable portrait had been stolen from a private collection in Geneva, with the thieves leaving behind a replica so perfect that the substitution wasn't discovered for months. The methodology was similar: careful planning, expert execution, no violence, explained the FBI official, and the timing would have allowed the same team to have been involved in both operations. The technical expertise required for the art forgery would translate well to defeating security systems. This potential connection opened new avenues of investigation, linking the Miami case to a broader network of high-value thefts across multiple continents. Art theft investigators from Interpol were consulted, bringing fresh perspectives to a case that had long since gone cold in conventional channels. Fine art theft requires a very specific skill set and, more importantly, access to very specific buyers, explained Interpol Art Crime Unit Director Sophia Bertrand. These aren't smash-and-grab operations. The perpetrators need connections to private collectors willing to purchase stolen works, individuals with both the financial resources and the moral flexibility to acquire pieces they can never display publicly. The same principle, Bertrand noted, would apply to the financial instruments taken in the Miami heist, particularly the bearer bonds. Such items would be worthless without a network of contacts able to launder or redeem them discreetly. This suggested that the Miami airport heist wasn't just an isolated incident, but potentially part of a pattern of sophisticated thefts catering to a shadow market of ultra-wealthy collectors and financial manipulators. Further investigation into the Geneva art theft revealed another curious detail. The stolen painting had been transported through Miami International Airport just 3 months before the heist, as part of a traveling exhibition. This created the possibility that the art theft and the airport heist were not just connected by methodology, but by specific reconnaissance conducted during the painting's transit. It's possible that whoever orchestrated these thefts used the art shipment as an opportunity to scout the airport's security systems, said Ramirez, when consulted about this new theory. High-value art moves with significant security, often following the same protocols as financial shipments. Access to one would provide valuable insights into the other. This theory gained additional credibility when investigators discovered that one of the security contractors who had accompanied the art shipment worked for the same firm later implicated in the airport heist, the company whose employees had disappeared with apparently forged diplomatic credentials. "We're looking at layers within layers," said the FBI official. "Organizations within organizations. The people who physically executed the heist may have been just one component of a much larger operation, with different teams handling reconnaissance, execution, transportation, and liquidation of the stolen goods. Such complexity would explain why the investigation had struggled to make progress. Traditional approaches to solving thefts assume a direct connection between the perpetrators and the stolen items, that those who take something do so because they want that specific thing. But in operations of this sophistication, the actual thieves might be merely hired specialists with no direct interest in or connection to what they're stealing. "Think of it as a corporation," suggested Anton Korchev, the former Interpol analyst. "Different departments with different responsibilities, each knowing only what they need to know to perform their specific function. The person who defeats the security system doesn't need to know where the goods are going. The person transporting the stolen items doesn't need to know who originally took them. It's compartmentalization as a security measure." This corporate analogy extended to another aspect of the case that had always puzzled investigators: the sheer resources required to plan and execute such an operation. Conservative estimates suggested that the Miami heist would have required months of planning, specialized equipment, forged credentials, transportation arrangements, and financial structures to handle the proceeds, a total investment potentially running into millions of dollars. "You're not making that kind of investment unless you're very confident of success," noted Martin Kelsey. "And you're not confident of success unless you have information that gives you a significant advantage, something that transforms what looks like an impossible task from the outside into a manageable risk." That information, he believed, could only have come from someone with intimate knowledge of the airport's security systems and procedures. Yet, despite exhaustive investigation, no such insider had ever been identified. Every employee with access had been cleared, their alibis verified, their finances examined for unexplained income. Unless, of course, the insider wasn't an employee at all. This led to a new and disturbing theory that the inside information had come not from airport personnel, but from someone within the security design team that had created the vault system itself. Such an individual would have comprehensive knowledge of the system's architecture without appearing on any airport employee roster. "The vault was custom designed by a specialized firm," explained Carlos Vega. "Their engineers had complete access during the installation and testing phase, including information about backup systems, response protocols, everything. But once the system was operational, they weren't involved in day-to-day security. They wouldn't have been on our radar as potential suspects." Investigators revisited the security firm that had designed the vault, reviewing personnel records and interviewing former employees. They discovered that one senior engineer who had worked on the Miami project had resigned unexpectedly 6 months before the heist, citing personal reasons. Attempts to locate this individual revealed that he had apparently left the country, with his last known address being an apartment in Vienna that had been vacated months earlier. "It's circumstantial," admitted the FBI official. "People change jobs, move overseas, lose touch with former colleagues. It happens all the time without criminal intent. But in the context of this case, with so few viable leads, it's significant enough to pursue." International law enforcement agencies were alerted, but the engineer seemed to have vanished as completely as the perpetrators of the heist itself. His professional credentials were legitimate. His background checks had raised no red flags during his employment, and his work on the vault system had been considered exemplary. If he was indeed connected to the theft, he had maintained an impeccable cover. "This is where we start entering the realm of professional intelligence operations rather than conventional criminality," said Korchev. "The level of legend building, the patience, the long-term planning, these are hallmarks of state-sponsored activities." Which raises the question, was this really just about the money, or was there another objective? The possibility that the Miami airport heist might have been something other than a straightforward theft, perhaps an intelligence operation disguised as a criminal act or a demonstration of capability by a foreign power, added yet another layer of complexity to an already Byzantine case. It would explain the extraordinary resources invested, the meticulous execution, and the complete disappearance of both perpetrators and proceeds. It might also explain why certain investigative avenues seem to reach dead ends so quickly, with potential leads evaporating and promising connections failing to materialize. If state actors were involved, they would have the resources and influence to obscure trails and protect assets in ways that conventional criminals could not. "I'm not saying it was definitely an intelligence operation," clarified Korchev, "but I am saying that the methodology is consistent with how such operations are conducted. And if that's what we're dealing with, it would explain why conventional investigative approaches have been so ineffective. For the investigators who had dedicated years to the case, this theory was both intriguing and frustrating. If true, It suggested that they had been playing a game whose true rules they didn't understand, pursuing criminals who weren't criminals in the conventional sense, seeking stolen goods that might have been merely a cover for the operation's actual objective. At some point, you have to ask yourself what you're really looking for, said Ramirez reflectively. Are we trying to recover stolen money, catch the perpetrators, understand how they did it? Or are we trying to answer a more fundamental question, what was this really about? That question, what was this really about, continued to haunt the case as it approached its 11th anniversary. The Miami airport heist remained officially unsolved, the stolen goods unrecovered, the perpetrators unidentified. Yet the investigation had not been entirely fruitless. It had revealed vulnerabilities in security systems, led to improved protocols, and generated valuable insights into the methodology of sophisticated theft operations. More importantly, perhaps, it had demonstrated the limitations of conventional security thinking in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. The assumption that physical barriers, surveillance systems, and access controls are sufficient to protect valuable assets had been fundamentally challenged by perpetrators who found a way to defeat all these measures simultaneously. The lesson here isn't that security is pointless, emphasized Vega. It's that security must be dynamic, adaptive, and constantly evolving. The moment you believe your system is impenetrable is the moment you become vulnerable to someone who sees it differently.